discussions about originality I find to be not very interesting. My reply to that is I've heard everything before. Music is not about originality because you're always standing on the shoulders of giants. You're not a human born in a vacuum. Anything you've done is building upon your forebears. It's more about a pleasant execution. Music that's executed well, done well. Moritz and Sabatnik 50, 60 years, it was like new old music. We've been hearing it the same for the past 60, 70 years or more.
Yeah.
So it's not about that. It's just about, is it authentically presented? Is it authentically performed? No matter what genre or what they're trying to say. Do I feel them, whoever's performing, musician or singer or otherwise? Am I feeling something, a vibration, a sensation? If I am, then good job on them.
Welcome to a very special episode of Quartertones. My name is Mikey Mhenna. We are here in studio with sort of a maestro behind the scenes in many ways, but increasingly getting in front of the scenes, Ahmad Kubbara, who is from Egypt, is in town in Beirut. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, so I'll walk back to the first time I heard your name, which was from Nadine and Roubi, who I just told you about. When she was on the series like 3 years ago, her EP was coming out, and I was listening to the tracks, and I was like, which jazz-influenced composer is producing these? And I thought, honestly, at the time, I was like, she's just taking a bunch of basically like tracks on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I did not expect them to be coming out of Giza.
The first time I heard Nadine and Roubi was when she put out Egyptian Silver, and she was just coming to Cairo at that point. Mm-hmm. We had a common friend, so I was following her, and then she took a picture at the gas station in front of the pyramids, which is right in front of my place because my studio is right in front of the pyramids. So then I thought, oh, this must be fake because she's like one step away from me. So I texted my friend, and he got us in touch. And then immediately, because she had a sound that I really like, which is that neo soul sound. Like when I first heard her, I thought of Erykah Badu and other neo soul voices that I really enjoyed. And so when we met up, and she told me she wanted to make an album, her voice and the style of stuff that she wrote was definitely, exactly my taste, basically. Yeah. I like the minor 9 chord, that chord. It just sounds so nice. And then you could play with it. It just sounds so nice anywhere you play.
Yeah.
And so that's what that's what Neo Soul is built on. It's playing that chord, and even though you could be singing in one key, you could be playing chord tones that are outside of that key, which gives us that jazziness, I guess, because when people think of something that's jazzy, they're thinking of a certain, or feeling a certain dissonance, but a sweet dissonance, I guess.
Yeah.
So the first track we did together was Honey Butter, which is my favorite track on that EP. And I had just got this this piano from the early 80s because I scavenge these synthesizers and keyboards that I find across Egypt. And I drive anywhere to get them. So I usually find them on like Facebook Marketplace or on other apps where like I have classifieds and things like that. So I saw this piano. It's called a Krumar DP80. It's like a synth Rhodes, so it doesn't have any mallets or hammers inside. It just has like circuits, voltages. And I went to Alexandria to get it from this junk shop, where this guy was clearing a house, and he found it. And it wasn't like, you couldn't test it or anything. Yeah. But at the time, it was like under $100. So I was like, I'm taking it. I'll see if it works. If it doesn't work for like the next 50 years, I'll keep trying. That's my mindset. So I bought it, took it back, and my tech in Cairo is Henny Michel. Henny Michel is like a mad scientist and a premium technician, because he used to be the tech for Ahmad the great Ahmad from like late 70s. So the guy has seen everything, and he's an older man. And so when I brought it to him, he opened it up, and he's like, "Where did you get this?" everything's like oxidized, all of the metal's rusted. I'm like, I got it from Alexandria. He's like, don't get stuff from there anymore. Everything, comes up like looking like crap. But he fixed it all up, and it works flawlessly. And that was the first record I used it on. Like Rhodesy piano sound is that on Honey Butter, and since then it's on everything. It's every record I've worked on, it finds its way because it's such a great tone. And it's an interesting piano because when you play harder, it kind of opens a filter, it makes you do like kind of squelchy synthy tones, like pow wow sounds, which you wouldn't also get from a Rhodes piano. But yeah, I've used it, for example, on Zayd Khalid's album last year and other releases.
So, like, let's say a session. Let's talk about Honey Butter, for example.
Yeah.
So, the session with Nadine, are you just sending her instrumentals, or are you sitting in the studio and sort of like noodling through chords and trying to match melodies with chords?
In the modern day paradigm, it is very common for producers to have beat packs and because since Corona especially, people are working a lot remotely. I don't favor that. If I prefer that the artist, we sit in the room, because then it goes beyond the actual music making. You get to know them as people. I get to learn about their influences, try to understand how they think or what's their aim, what they're trying to express or convey through their music and art. What is it about their personality that I personally think is interesting that can be presented well in the music or make it shine? So remotely, you don't get that instant feedback that you get when you're sitting with someone in the room. It's much more kind of happening. However, I have been working the past few years remotely with artists, but when they do visit me, it's much better. Sometimes they also feel like, oh, there's a creative block, or even for myself, I feel like I don't get it, or I don't know how to kind of present them right, but then when we meet up, it makes sense. So in the case of Nadine, she's a prolific writer. So she came with the song. And that's, for me at least, I really enjoy that. If the song is there, then you know the way. Yeah. So you can kind of really serve the song. And she was one of the first artists that actually told me, hey, Koob, do you think it's bad that I write on YouTube beats? I told her, no, this is brilliant. Because, like James Blake, for example. James Blake on a podcast talked about how he writes. He plays on the piano and he sings. Yeah. And then once it's in the computer, he can then take away that piano and maybe reharmonize it or put a new sound. And if you don't have that, if you can't play a progression that you can sing over, whether on your acoustic guitar or on your piano,
you need instrumentals.
Therefore, an instrumental is great because it also gives you some sort of structure. The instrumentals usually have an intro, then like a verse section, a chorus section, or a bridge section, or whatever. And that arrangement that's done for you to write on actually does help the writer.
Because it's a reference track.
Yeah, it helps them in many ways. Other than the harmony that helps them come up with a melody, the arrangement that's put musically there, even that temp, it's kind of like how even in the movie world when people are like against temp music. Yeah, temp music can be bad, but it's also helpful. Yeah. I always encourage artists to write on anything.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you write on. We can reimagine it later, but if you're gonna stop yourself writing, that's the first step to making a song.
Let's play a little bit of Honey Butter, then I kind of want to hear how you approached it. So I'll play a little bit here. Has such Lupe Fiasco vibes.
Yeah, there's so many like influences that came together in that. I think I'm a big fan of J Dilla.
Yeah.
And that kind of minimal boom bap hip hop production, like Pete Rock, Q-Tip, all the classic, Large Professor, DJ Premier, all the classic hip hop producers, because it was about the loop, early boom bap or early hip hop, and once I played, so that progression is. So it's kind of simple. You play that minor 7 chord, and that's what flat 13 chord, but in like an inversion condensed down. But it gives you that somberness that from like. Then we go back into the sun, and that technically it's an E major, or you could play it as a D flat minor 9. But the D flat minor 9 kind of makes it deeper, and I didn't use that. I made it lighter. So that progression is quite well known in Neo Soul. It's not like I didn't make it up or anything. Actually, I don't think it's even possible to make a new chord progression these days. And that was from the beat that she wrote to. So she wrote to this harmony. So
interesting.
She wrote to it. So that already made it that when I played it and then added my ornamentation and like little spicy notes on the top or little melodies, it already fit because she had embodied that harmony. And I think that really helps. If we can always reharmonize, and I will always advocate if I think the harmony is not serving the tune. But if the harmony is serving the tune already, for me, then my imagination can even go higher. Then we can focus things on feel. On the bass, my great friend and bassist Ahmad Malouani is on the bass, giving it that thick groove and that weight. For the drums, this was also one of the quickest productions. We spent more time on the recording the vocals and vocal production and layering than the actual music. Because once we had that like Rhodes or that Krumar sound in. And then in the beat, it was just about J Dilla style kind of. J Dilla usually filters the beat in the verses. I just took away the hi-hats, brought them back. Yeah. Things like that. And it's one of my favorite tracks. It's probably my favorite track I've done with Nadine because it's the music I would listen to just chilling by myself. Yeah.
I'm curious. I heard in an interview you saying that you grew up as a metalhead, basically.
Yeah, so I'm a millennial of that generation. So in the early 2000s, we didn't have any of the pop music that exists now for the current, Gen Zs or younger, where now you have such a huge diversity of local Egyptian artists from not just from Cairo but from all around Egypt, doing like great music from the Maharagan scene to the hip hop scene to the cross section that. The trap shabby scene, and others. Back when I, was a teen 20 years ago, you only had the big pop names, say like Amr Diab, Tamer Hosni, and Shireen or whatever, and then you had the underground rock/metal scene. So we go to these like private venues where kids would band together to create these events, and they'd be covering a lot. So they'd be covering like classic, thrash stuff, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, to more current stuff at the time like Opeth and other kinds of death metal. Yeah. To the ones that were classic rockers that were like Dio and Deep Purple. So there's a whole like
rainbow.
Yeah, variety. And me and my brother, we used to go in and enjoy these nights, and we weren't like wearing like all the metal T-shirts or anything, but we were still super metal heads at heart because I started like pirating music when I was 11 years old, at the the start of the peer-to-peer network softwares like iMesh, Kazaa, and LimeWire. So that started kind of my musical journey, because I wanted to differentiate myself from my sisters who were like 8 and 12 years older than me, with their CD collection of Whitney Houston, Mary J. Blige, and Mariah Carey, and all this music that, you know, kind of circled back after my teens to be the music I enjoy most, because that's where, like, that's why I love neo soul and like Faith Evans and like Jill Scott and all these.
Yeah, it was coming out of your sister's bedroom.
Yeah, that was at the time when I was like 12
like,
or 13.
For some reason, I love SWV. I don't know why.
Like at 12 and 11, there was just this huge like kind of rejection. Like, no, I want the boys' music. And at that time, it was the new metal wave on MTV. Then Biscuit, Korn, Slipknot, Disturbed, and all these bands from that era, and you know, Papa Roach and and that was my music. Me and my brother was like, distorted guitar, grooves. But then it made us curious to listen to, okay, so these guys came out in the late 90s or in the 90s, so what were they listening to? So we kind of went back in time, and the internet allowed us to download like whole discographies. So that's when we got into Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, and we started to appreciate musicmanship, because the 80s metal is different than 90s metal, because it had loads of solos and instrumental like sections. And so like, oh, these guys are like shredding, and then you find going to the metal gigs, you know, these teens and other kids our age also going off playing Yngwie Malmsteen and other like shredding kind of music. And then, so okay, what was before them? So then we went back in time to the 70s, and then Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and then it was the Zeppelin DVD, Pompeii, Live in Pompeii. And they were, then that was the first time I saw like Synthesizers when he was playing, you know, On the Run, and Roger Waters. So like when I saw this like lab gear, I was like, I had to have, that's the first time it got into my mind that I had to have this. But I realized I also listened to these sounds because I'm a big fan of, like, I grew up on a lot of 80s sci-fi movies like John Carpenter and all these.
Yeah, they have all that stuff.
Yeah, they have all these sounds. And then I found out that John Carpenter himself did the score with his sound designer partner. Anyway, so Rick Wright in that Live in Pompeii video, the interviewer was asking him, so who are your musical influences? And he said Miles Davis, and he then showed it on the keys. And I was like, who's Miles Davis? And
wait, hold on. Do you remember what he actually played?
No, but
we got to go back and figure that out.
But it probably would have been something, I guess. So what? Or he would have probably shown some of the fourth voicings that they used at the time or something. But he did, when he said Miles Davis, and then and that was the start of getting into jazz in my late teens. Yeah, I discovered Bill Evans through Miles Davis and Coltrane. I think both of them from that era up until the 60s affected me most, because Bill Evans, for me, is the top. There is no jazz pianist that can eclipse Bill Evans for me. Why? Because he's the most romantic, lyrical, rhythmically interesting, and obviously his harmonies are very interesting. And there was an interview with Bill Evans when his brother was interviewing him. There's a classic like black and white video, and he did something, and his brother asked him, "Okay, can you show me how you did that?" And he said, "Well, I could show you, but I'll rob you of the wonder of discovering it for yourself." And that philosophy really stuck with me, where the way I learned how to play the keys wasn't through learning a lot of standards, even though I learned later, like in the past few years, that does help to learn.
They do help.
It does help.
For sure.
But discovering things for yourself. So my whole playing style got built up around the fact that I don't study, so I figure things out and I obsess over them and see how far I could take them. But then when I play with others, they tell me, "Oh, these changes, what are these changes,
They're
man?"
weird, yeah.
But then I always remind them, when Coltrane he came out with giant steps. Everyone said, like, "What are these changes, man?" Then they later called them the Coltrane changes. Now, I'm not saying I'm Coltrane by any stretch, but sometimes it's my, like, that tune you played before we started, Etnin, they're all minor 9 chords, and then so just moving with that same shape, was one of the first tunes that I wrote, and it was just interesting to my ears. It was interesting how you'd sing over that. So, singing over things that are, you wouldn't think or don't follow the circle of fifths or the circle of fourths or the harmonic relationships you would immediately go to the ear. Sometimes finding the sweetness in even like chromatic stuff like. Suddenly you can get something melodic even though you're doing changes that are not, say, very familiar. And definitely Bill Evans is one of the ones where even his chord voicings are melodies. Like if you break his chords, they'll play a melody.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting way that when he said how he builds his chords, that his chords are melodic in themselves. And maybe that's why I like the minor 9 chord, because if you play it da 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 da, it's just a melody in itself.
Yeah.
But at the time when I first heard Bill Evans or Miles Davis or Coltrane in my late teens, my ears couldn't get them. Having said all that, I couldn't get it. Like,
did it feel too simple for you? Did it feel too sparse? Did it feel?
It actually felt very complicated in terms of like Love Supreme, the classic album by Coltrane. The first track, Acknowledgement, he cycles through all 12 keys.
Yeah. So Coltrane, I can imagine feeling very complicated.
Yeah,
definitely.
So the feeling was just like, I don't get it, or like I'm not absorbing it musically, but I have this curiosity. I'm still interested. And so at the time I was listening to a lot of modern jazz, contemporary jazz there, like Robert Glasper, and others, which with the production being, bass heavy.
Like from the Dilla family.
Yeah, obviously Robert Glasper was influenced from Jay Dilla or trying to play the boom bap live.
Yeah.
But in his trio work, that's what I heard his trio work first with Chris Dave and so on, and Vicente Archer, and it was the kind of jazz that it was to my ears very smooth, because maybe it was less chords, but the chords were all sweet. There was not as much dissonance and hard changes.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I listened to a lot of that and Christine Scott and other contemporary artists, when I went back and listened to Coltrane and Miles Davis, I absorbed it more. And then listening to Bitches Brew, Miles Davis blew my mind, because suddenly there's like distortion and electric bass and polyrhythms and like different things coming, and like the music changing drastically. But I really felt that, and then Herbie Hancock with Chameleon and all the early 70s fusion wave was definitely the kind of music I wanted to play. Like the effects, having that tape echo on the keys and like pa, pa, pa.
Yeah.
And all these things were taken later into dub music and techno and electronic music and so on. Or the synths and the leads, Return to Forever, Chick Corea. All these things made a very big impression on me. So when I went to the UK to study between 2010 and 2016, my brother also was studying with me, and he plays the drums. We used to play a lot of like, pubs and taverns where, we'd have a few people in front of us and we'd just go wild playing, improvised, jazzy or free jazz stuff. We were so into Ornette Coleman and his philosophy as well. Which also went back to the thing where I don't care about, telling you the chord changes or whatever. Just use your ears and you'll be okay, which is kind of brutal in one way. But the musicians that played with us, they loved that. They didn't want someone to prescribe what we're going to play. So in that way that I felt so free to be in the driving seat in terms of harmony. And they'll just follow. And even if they're not going to be playing melodic lines, they might be like doing noises and sounds with their pedals or their synthesizers or whatever. And at that time, I was really into avant-garde experimental music of all kinds. Yeah. From noise music like Merzbow in Japan to super silent, the Nordic trio quartet who were amazing. Two others, and of course got into a lot of the early synth music history, like Morton Subotnick. Silver Apples of the Moon was the first actual electronic music album ever released, and when he was asked why, this is not music, this is nonsense, this is all noise, well, he told him, I don't want to make new old music with these new instruments.
Yeah.
And that also stuck with me. New old music. What does he mean by that? Oh, he means like the difference between a Moog synthesizer and a Buchla synthesizer of the time. So a bit of like back history. So in synthesizer electronic music history, at least in the United States, you had like kind of two poles. You had on the East Coast Robert Moog, who created Moog, the renowned Moog synthesizers, and on the West Coast you had Don Buchla, who created also the Buchla synthesizers. But they had two kind of different philosophies, where Moog wanted to sell them, so he put a 12-tone chromatic keyboard on his synths, and therefore they were able to be used on Michael Jackson records, Stevie Wonder, and so on, because you could play your classic bass lines or all the tunes you'd want. But Buchla was like, no, I'm not going to put a keyboard. That's not the point of making these instruments. The point is that we have the free frequency, so we could assign whatever scale or pitch or relationships. I'm not going to constrain the user to the Western 12-tone system. Yeah. And therefore, the music made by these systems reflected that. Moog, the first modular systems were used by, Keith Emerson and so on in prog rock, and later by Stevie Wonder or Michael Jackson, more mainstream pop music of the time. But Don Buchla was used by people like Morton Subotnick, who is an academic and also a composer, and more on the avant-garde sound art realm or flavor. But it was all very interesting for me because even Lou Reed made an album, Machine Music, so exploring feedback with his guitars, and then
I want to play one of these. So I think the YouTube video now that you have up.
Oh yeah, that was a jam from last, I think, summer with the last iteration at the point of my modular system. Yeah.
Okay, so this is modular. This is on YouTube, so you can go out and check it. We'll put it on the video as well. So as we're listening to this, how much of this is like quote unquote digital and how much of this is analog?
Okay, that's some people think of me as a purist, maybe on the outside in some way, but I'm definitely not. So in the early days of my modular journey or synth journey, I was really obsessed with analog synthesizers because that kind of came as a reaction to having used a lot of computers and MIDI controllers, and I was sick and tired from them crashing in shows. So in 2012, because people take it for granted now. Computers are very powerful. Like I got a new computer last year, and that Mac M1 chip, and it's like on steroids. I can't crash it even if I tried. Yeah. Like I loaded up once like 50 instances of autotune, and nothing happened. But back in the day, in 2010. In 2011, I used to have MIDI like fader banks and knobs and connect them. I used to use Mainstage and Ableton at the time to play live. It was great. There were so great plugins that had like wacky sounds, and it was really fun to map them all and to play with them. But then I got frustrated from these guitarists with their pedal boards. They just plug into the amp and they're done.
Yeah, for sure.
And they don't crash. So I worked at this sound. I was a student, so I worked at this like live sound warehouse for a few months. Got the money, and I bought the Arturia Mini Brute, who just came out in 2012. And I was going to the shop in music store in Birmingham and trying it out for months. The Mini Brute against the Bass Station 2, which has also just come out by Novation, and the Korg MS-20 Mini. And the Korg MS-20 Mini was a recreation of a vintage synth, and it looked super cool. And all three of them are analog. And there was the start of the analog renaissance in the music industry that we're still living in. But I like the Mini Brute because it was what you see is what you get. Like the MS-20 Mini, but I liked that it was a new synth.
Yeah.
It wasn't an old recreation. It was just a brand new thing. And so I bought it at the end. And I bought a couple of like electro-harmonics pedals, like a distortion and a delay. And I decided I'm just going to use hardware now, and I'm not going back to the software world. And yeah, that started my journey. And since then, I picked up a lot of other toys. But it got me to want the modular, because then you could, and on the Mini Brute there are connections, so you could connect control voltage to the filter or something else, but you can't rewire the synth to kind of have the second envelope map it to something else. It's hardwired inside, so it is what you get. So I started building my modular system around 2017. And at first it was around also analog oscillators, but then you figure out that they're susceptible to temperature changes and tuning issues, even the tightest of them. And they don't have a lot of variety of sound if you're playing, say, an hour set. You could get, unless you want it all to be kind of the same vein. So that's when I started buying digital oscillators that could give you, different sound palettes, but they'll never go out of tune. And I also got lots of effects and other things and drums, and decided that the modular will be a whole groove box that I could play a whole show with.
Yeah.
Now in the studio, I rarely ever use the modular in its entirety, except if I'm jamming with it. Usually in the studio and production, the modular is a great loop generator. You could create really interesting organic loops. I make it so that I clock it through Ableton. So it's a hybrid system where everything goes with whatever project I'm working on. And then you could even send control voltage and write MIDI clips, and it'll send it to the modular.
Okay.
So that's one side, that I use the modular to generate like sounds and put it back into Ableton, or I send out sounds from Ableton into the module to get processed, whether through filters or through effects, and then back in. So that's the main way I use them. Or I use the whole system as like a giant mono synth, because I could just hook up my MIDI controller into the modular and immediately have a keyboard interface with it. And yeah.
Can I compare that to? I found this clip from 2017 on your Instagram. Okay. And it's a 707, okay?
Yeah.
I want to compare the system that you're talking about there to this. I'm going to play a little bit of it.
Okay.
So this is just a loop that you've created.
Yeah, this I think I was just jamming on the 707 by itself.
Yeah, so this is just like literally a piece of hardware that allows you to create these just loops that just sequence over and over and over again.
Exactly. So it's funny that you played that you mentioned the 707, because the 707 was a drum machine. I actually bought 5 of them in my life and sold all 5.
Okay.
Why?
Why didn't you just keep the first one the entire time?
Huh?
Why didn't you just keep the first one the entire time?
Because there's always something shinier that I wanted to get. so then I sold it, but then I was really lucky. Like I sold many for quite good profit.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to buy other things. But some pieces of gear, because I really love these toys.
Yeah.
But sometimes when I let go of them, I feel guilty. But then I get it again.
Yeah.
Or there's an opportunity where I could get it again. But then I realize it's not for me. So the 707 is a really fun machine to play and jam on. But the sounds are super constrained. Okay, you could put them through, effects processors, distortions, or whatever to play with them. But you can't tweak either the sample pitch or the sample length.
Yeah.
So these are the sounds. Now it has a mixer section, and and it's step sequencer, so you could jam and have fun. But I scored the R8, which is a Roland drum machine that was after this one from '87 or '88. That allows you. It's still sample based, but it allows you to pitch and change the samples in a way, though it doesn't have the same fun jammability with the mixer section. However, yeah, for me, by the studio, like, are islands. So you don't use the whole studio. That's what I thought I wanted, but that's not. Like, my studio is still kind of like a keyboard, like music shop, where all the keyboards are set up. If you press on something, it'll make a sound. Yeah. But it's not made to be used all at once anyway. Yeah. You could use one thing at a time and see what you get out of it. For example, like last year I found a Roland Space Echo, the RE201. And I've just had so much fun running different things, like with El Beit Al Ashwai, all of the guitars are processed through the Space Echo in one way or another. Even if you don't have a prominent delay on, gives a bit of like slapback or even distortion, because its preamp kind of overdrives the signal a bit.
Let's play a little bit of, I think Mish Arif uses that. So let's play a little bit.
Mish Arif, definitely the guitars. Yeah.
Okay, let's play it. So for this track, how involved are you in the composition from the beginning to the end?
Yeah, with Qais, it's really fun because he always comes with fragments. For example, for this track, he came to me with that stem of that bass line.
Yeah.
So that synth bass line wasn't made. I didn't make it in the studio. He came with it, and we built the track off of that. Okay. So that was the only thing there. Once we started like making an arrangement, then he went back to write over it. And yeah, the guitars on this one are definitely processed through the RE201. With the other track, Masan Kun Baid, he uses his microtonal guitar.
Yeah.
But that's also going through the RE201. I have this also like vintage Fender amp from the 80s that I run most things, guitars through as well. But for me, it depends on the situation. Sometimes you could just like DI the guitar and use plugins. Sometimes it's nice to run it through to get a different color. But I always like to commit. A lot of times in modern production, because of the tech we have, we want to delay decisions to later. Hey, we'll fix it in the mix. Hey, we'll put something on it later. And I feel like, why don't we just record it right now? Let's get the sound. Let's make a decision. Let's make the sound now. If we don't like it later,
let's decrease the number of emails later.
Yeah, like that's why I always prefer not recording DI guitars. Sometimes even the thought of, hey, I'll just record it in parallel, I might use it later, I find sometimes is a manifesting kind of limiting thought. Why don't you assume we're recording the final take now? It gives everything a different spirit.
Yeah.
And if it's trash later, then we could come back and fix it. But usually, in my experience, it's not. Usually when you commit, it actually inspires you.
Yeah, it's like performing live.
Yeah, because the sounds as well, once you decide this is the sound, then if you're writing or if you're tweaking or whatever, the arrangement or the composition, you'll be more inspired if the sound is better.
Yeah.
That's why, like classic, like rock acts like Tool, for example, on an interview from, like I saw recently, the singer, Maynard James Keenan, said that he's only involved in the album once all the music is done. Then he takes 2 weeks. Obviously, his fans must be like, pulling their hair out because it takes them years between every album. But the singer was like, no, for my part only takes 2 weeks because the music's there and I'm inspired and it's done. So if they had sent him, you know, like scratch guitar tracks or scratch tracks to, you know, to write on, he wouldn't have been as inspired. So I'm a big fan of just putting, not scratch, like let's assume this is the real thing.
Yeah, get it done.
Yeah, and move forward.
I want to talk about performing live. Okay, a lot of when people think about what a producer does in 2024, it's like the classic, like 10 beats a day every summer, 10 beats a day for the whole summer, right? This idea of this like basement Kanye-like character downstairs, Jay Dilla, you know, just on their beats, or some like EDM guy who isn't on stage, isn't performing live, doesn't play with a live instrument. But you're not that, right?
Yeah,
you
I mean,
perform live.
But from the history of the job of a producer in the music industry has changed over time. So before, a music producer or was a kind of a director, like a director in a movie.
Yeah,
they oversee all the parts, but they're not the ones acting. They're not the ones you know, pulling the camera like the cinematographer. They're not the ones doing the lights. They're not writing the script. They're ones directing everything. So, for example, like the classic, you know, relationship Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson. So Quincy wasn't playing anything on Michael Jackson records, nor was he writing the music.
Nor was he at the soundboard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So not the technical or not the creative in that way, but he was guiding and orchestrating the whole process, the whole team. So that is the original job of a music producer. Now, with the advancement of music technology and the tech, just like now people are grumbling about AI is going to take our jobs. The same thing that now you need less people. So one of the first artists to say that I'll self-produce everything was like Prince. You know, when drum machines came out, drummers thought they'll be out of a job. Now that didn't pan that way, but it allowed Prince to start producing his own music, having the LM1, one of the first sample-based drum machines, and recording himself, you know, in his home studio. Now, fast forward 30 years or something, then you got guys like Kanye or Jay Dilla, Dr. Dre, the ones that using the MPC, also from Roger Lynn, the same guy that made the LM1, where you could just sample stuff and you could make a whole music production on one machine. But they were sampling very well recorded music.
Yeah, from the 50s, 60s, 70s.
That's another thing. Like the source material already, like when they're sampling drum breaks to create, you know, boom bap beats, those drums are recorded really well.
Yeah, like 12 mics on the drum set.
No, even then, it wasn't even like when even they had 4-track tape machines. It's just that the engineers then, because of the limitations of technology, they thought more about mic placement, which mic to use, the room, and all these things that nowadays, you know, when you're recording in your bedroom, because you know now you got like noise cancellation and removing, and you could make on auto-tune and all these things that could make any bad recording, or let's say not perfect recording, to a more than perfect one. Back then it wasn't the same. So the MPCs or these samplers allowed producers, in the case of Kanye it was the ASR10 and Sonic ASR10, or its predecessor, the EPS 16 Plus, LP uses that, and Pete Rock and so on. It allowed them to not need the whole studio, not need a whole band. You just need your tape player, your vinyl player, and your sampler, and maybe a mic, and that's it. So that made the whole thing. It was the start of the star producer, like Dr. Dre, P. Diddy, and then Kanye, and Jay Dilla. But whereas Dre or P. Diddy or Kanye were also enamored by the lifestyle and how they look to people like now we are the new rock stars or whatever. I'm more kind of the Jay Dilla kind of school, where no, it's not about that. It's just about, for me, it's about the music.
Yeah.
If others think of me as cool or whatever, that's good on them.
Yeah.
But really, the music just speaks for itself, or the music is, for me, like as deep as as this goes. So intellectualizing music is also one of those things that is used a lot for branding. So I could, like we're talking about some piece of music you played of mine, in post, talk to you about this and that and geek out over the technicals. They are technical, but I can't really tell you, like explain or try to, babble about all the feelings and all these like kind of non-quantifiable things in art, which I feel like are what people are selling in terms of when, especially Kanye, when he talks about his music, it's like, yeah, I mean, I do like the analogy that, music is, our brain is like a radio. If you brought a radio to a caveman, they'd think that the radio is making the music, but the radio is getting the transmission. Same thing, I would say artists or myself, I'm not creating the music. The music, I'm transmitting it. Where is it about transmitting? That's whole like spiritual talk about consciousness, soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it. But it's more of a transmission. So that's why all discussions about originality I find also to be kind of not very interesting. For me, music is not about originality because you're not the first human. And therefore, you're always standing on the shoulders of giants. You're not a human born in a vacuum. You're a human born among other humans that have existed for thousands of years. So therefore, anything you've done is an influence or is a building upon your forebears, the one that came before. So it's not about originality. It's more about the correct execution or pleasant execution, I would say. Music that's executed well, done well, performed well,
the craft.
Delivered well. That's why. And jazz is all about that. Like Coltrane, for example, My Favorite Things was a play, The Sound of Music, but he gave it his own rendition that was quite dark and not the same. So would you say, oh, he's not original, he's just playing, Sound of Music? That would be ridiculous to say, right? So I would say this the same in modern music, wherein people critique something for, being nostalgic or retro or regurgitation. For me, or I've heard that before. Well, my reply to that is like, I've heard everything before. Like, what have I not heard before? Morton Sabatnik, 50, 60 years, he was like new old music. So we've been hearing it the same for the past 60, 70 years or more. So it's not about that. It's just about, is it authentically presented? Is it authentically performed? Do I feel them? Whoever is performing, musician or singer or otherwise, am I feeling something, a vibration, a sensation? If I am, then good job on them. No matter what genre they're doing or what they're trying to say. I find the whole thing's about talking about a genius or like something that we've never heard before and all these things kind of not interesting.
بس السؤال إنه when you're on stage performing, right? As somebody who's kind of just all about the music, you've performed on a lot of different stages with a lot of different acts. And so I'm curious, how does it feel performing in those different venues? Whether it's like in a trio, you're here doing a jazz trio. You've been on stages with rock bands, with like straight ahead rappers, like lots of different folks. I'm curious if you can contrast some of them, like what it feels like the last like 5-10 shows that you've
definitely I enjoy it when I'm on stage with when the artists are in their element and they really turn it on.
Cool.
For example, Abi Yusuf is a great performer. I've been lucky to be on stage with him on many shows where he really brings out he's raw. And in certain songs, and especially the ballads, the personal ones, you could feel he means it, and it's authentic expression of emotion. Zaid Khalid is a monster performer. Like if I'm not looking at Zaid, I could tell if he's smiling or not.
Wow!
Just based on his voice, because the way the inflection, his delivery, and it's very honest. He's very honest. other performers that have gotten so much better, like Donia Wael now is a very, very powerful performer. Lilla Fadda is a very powerful performer in terms of the voice. Both of them do very well on stage. Now, in terms of my personal enjoyment on stage, of course, I enjoy it most when I'm playing the keys, and I have most fun playing in my trios or in my combos because it's purely my taste. I've been asked a lot, like, "Oh, Kubbara, you work in like different productions with different artists. So, what is the Kubbara sound?" And I come more from like, I guess, Rick Rubin kind of philosophy, where if I'm working with an artist, I'm making their sound. So it's very flattering when someone listens to, say, like a Zaid Khaled track, and he feels it sounds like Zaid Khaled, or a Nadine Roubi track, it sounds like Nadine Roubi. I don't expect, or do I want anyone, to listen to any of the music I make with these artists and think of me first.
Yeah.
Then I feel like I haven't served the artist right. It should sound like them. But if you listen to my own jazz stuff, which I hopefully will be out later this year or early next year,
Hala will play finally, one too, yeah.
Yeah, then that will be that. These are my personal tunes, and what I enjoy about it is the connection with the musicians. It's telepathic. It's exhilarating. It's in the moment. It's spontaneous. That's what I enjoy most about jazz. The improvisational culture, or part of ethos of it, where it's a conversation. It's kind of very similar to podcasting, right? We don't have a script. We can have like an idea, like a framework of some sorts, but we're not following a script. And I think that's the most exciting part for me.
Yeah.
That in the moment we can react to each other, and there'll be those moments, and how dynamic it is. We can be very loud and very fast, and we go very slow and very quiet, and the oscillation in between.
I have a question, two last questions, and then I want to end on the track that you're going to play later on tonight. This might sound like a silly question, but you're mentioning all these different artists coming out of Egypt and out of the region that represent a huge diversity of sound, right? Sonically, energetically, personality-wise, genre, it's totally different. In 20 years, if a kid in 20 years comes to you and says, "Oh, 2024, the 2020s were a golden age in music in Egypt," would you disagree with them?
No, definitely not. The past 5 years or so, or even longer, past 5-6 years have been a golden age, at least in Egypt, if not the whole area, the whole region. Because like I mentioned before, 20 years ago, when I was a teen, none of this existed. None of this infrastructure, none of these players in the industry, they didn't exist. And so now that if I'm a teen, I could go to cool shows, seeing my favorite, whether hip hop, Maharagan, or other pop artists, and or seeing their videos on YouTube, and that I could go up to them and ask them for a picture. Back when I was a teen, they didn't exist. I didn't have these idols to kind of follow, so it's brilliant now. And the fact that you could just, if you have like, I have a lot of kids text me DM me on Instagram asking about production, or asking me, "Hey, listen to this," and I always try to give them, feedback as much as I can, and that's brilliant because now the resources are more than ever. Like Audio Bus, my good friend Mustafa Adil in Cairo, they're a teaching platform for Ableton and music production, and other platforms that didn't exist.
But what do you think is driving it, aside from the tech, aside from the democratization of music production because of phones and computers? Aside from that, right? There is still like a music infrastructure. You are in the music business, right? At the end of the day. What are some of the infrastructure things that may or may not be changing that is allowing for some of these acts to not only be musically interesting, but also commercially successful?
That's the thing. Like companies, that whether managerial or otherwise, that support these artists are now starting to pop up.
Yeah.
So they're in their infancy compared to, say, in the West, when such agencies have been around for a while.
Yeah.
And so you got, even like in Saudi, Middle East is just a few years old. And that would be one of the if not the largest of these new kind of companies, for example. So we'll wait and see in 5 to 10 years how all these, still new companies, what they'll do for the music industry, how they will help artists, which artists do benefit. Because now we're in the day of also self-production and self-marketing, and the roles of labels are different. Back in the day, the classics, like in the heyday of the Beatles, Pink Floyd, the labels owned the studios, the recording studios. They owned the distribution and the whole chain. Nowadays, they don't. Or there are new companies with new models like Spotify and the streaming giants that have changed the kind of game. And now we have AI tech coming out. We'll see how are AI artists going to be a thing or not. And if they're a thing, how will they affect the real human artists? And so just like though with drum machines, how drum machines didn't put out drummers out of business, I don't think that AI is putting anyone out of business. It's another tool, just like auto-tune, just like synthesizers, just like whatever tech or instrument we use. I use AI like stem separation daily in the studio.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that are just brilliant to immediately work on, make things easier. So there'll be many applications. So in terms of the industry, though, we'll see. I always say the proof is in the pudding, right? If we have an example of an agency backing a group of artists very well and seeing them after 5 to 10 years doing well and them growing the new coming waves, then we'll say it's a healthy music industry where everyone's doing well. So yeah, we'll find out.
I'm going to play that last track that we talked about. That's off, inshallah, your upcoming album.
Yeah.
Have you written all the songs for the what will eventually become this album?
Yes, they're all like tunes because the jazz works in the way of like head and tail, or most classic jazz. So it's just a melody that's stated in the beginning.
Yeah.
Then we improvise, like past the solo, we jam out, and then we state the melody, and then we finish the track. So they're all based on that one.
Okay.
On these.
Are there any other, before we wrap up, I'm curious, since you're in front of a keyboard, are there any other tunes that, like, if you're sitting down, you are super stressed out, and you need to sort of relax, what are the tunes that you play without thinking, because they're from your childhood and you know them like the back of your hand?
Well, they're always usually my tunes. Like now, of course, I play lots of different tunes that aren't mine with different artists. But the tunes that I always go back and to play are usually my tunes. So there's another one that I'm playing called Alif, and that one was I wrote back in 2015 after coming back from an electronic music festival, actually, and it's just a romantic line. Things like that. I really like, that's why I like Bill Evans and Miles Davis so much. They kind of, throughout their careers, their melodies were always kind of quite simple, especially Miles, and romantic.
For sure.
And lyrical. So even though I love like going super chromatic and things like that, I really do enjoy the very simple, sweet melodies. Yeah, definitely.
Nice. If you were to make a list of albums that people should check out, I mean, you've listed already a ton of people and things. If you were put together a list of, you're like, all right, you're 15 years old, you are musically adventurous, go pick up these 5 to 10 albums, what would they be?
Okay, I'm gonna be. I'll say stuff from the past like 20 years, not even going back. So
Perfect.
like for boom bap, J Dilla Donuts is great. For the modern jazz scene, Welcome to the Hills, Yusuf Dayes is brilliant. For rock music, Queens of the Stone Age, Songs for the Deaf. In the past 20 years, 20 plus maybe now. But yeah, it's one of my favorites. Say for like not classical, but for the minimalist Philip Glass works. That's older than 20 years, but that's really brilliant. I'll try to say something from every genre. Yeah. For a pop record, I think Tame Impala Currents was a great, even though people don't think of him as pops, but Currents I thought was a very great pop turn. Yeah, I think those albums are worth a listen.
EDM, anything from the sort of like broader EDM?
From the dance world, I don't. But the thing is with dance stuff, I usually don't listen to albums.
Yeah, full albums. صح.
But the one that was as club music, that was quite interesting was the Sophie album from a few years ago. She used just one synth for all the tracks, and they were very, from a sound design perspective, very interesting. But from our guys in the scene, Rami Abadir's Mutate was amazing, combining breaks and tabla. I like Talata Fez's productions. Hassan Abu Alam has been putting out great stuff. My friends at the trio Tilt in Cairo, they're doing really cool stuff. They just put out a single. In general, Cairo or the area has been putting out a lot of great albums. I really enjoyed Shab Jdeed's last album with Nazir, the one put out a few years ago. There's a new artist in Cairo called Too Late that I'm really liking, his R&B pop sensibility. There's so much always coming out. So I try to keep, keep in touch with what's going on, so I'm not too distanced. But there's a lot of brilliant music coming out from the area, for sure.
One of the last things I want to ask you, just because art is supposed to like reflect life, right? In theory, it's supposed to really tap into people's authentic expression, the artist's authentic expression about their life and the world that they live in. In our region, very often we are living in situations where we don't always have the luxury of expressing ourselves freely, for fear of retribution, for fear of legal consequences, many different things. Egypt, like Beirut, like Lebanon, has gone through a lot of challenging times economically, politically. How much do you feel like art, music that is coming out of Egypt now is actually reflecting how people feel about daily life and how people feel about
in many ways, a lot of the artists are thinking inward, but talking about themselves. Yeah. And then that could have a relatability with others without being very specific, just so they don't have any backlash. But other artists like Kairuki, they put on a track, تلك القضية ولا القضية, that one, because of what's happened, the war recently, and that one as well is not just personal, it's more universal. So there is space for more universal kind of narratives. Yeah. But the personal narratives can also be universal because of how they relate. And I think there is space for that. Yes, you sometimes can't be explicit in terms of what you're trying to say, but I think these limitations always breed more creativity. Yeah. They definitely do. And there are ways around them, and there are ways to connect to your audience while also preserving yourself so you can, keep going and not be shut down.
Amazing. Ahmad, man.
Well,
Thanks
it's
so
such
much.
a pleasure, Mike.
Yeah. It's I'm a huge fan of your work if it's not
Happy.
obvious, but thanks so much for being here.
I love being here. Thank you.